Dad's voice sliced through the buzz of conversation, loud and sharp enough to still the air. "Don't even think about showing up to the wedding, Emma," he said, his face tight with irritation, his words deliberate and cutting. "You'll ruin the photos. Your brother deserves better than having you in his background. He's the golden child, after all. You'll just bring the wrong kind of attention." It felt like the ground shifted under my feet. Heads turned. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Even the fairy lights seemed to dim for a second. My heart pounded in my chest, the sting of humiliation blooming hot and fast under my skin. I caught Mom's eye across the lawn, hoping, praying for some flicker of defense, of discomfort, of anything. But she simply looked away, pretending not to notice. Ashley, Tyler's bride-to-be, smirked slightly into her champagne glass. Tyler didn't even look up. The silence that followed was deafening. I swallowed the lump in my throat, my nails digging into my palms as I forced myself to stay composed. I could feel the old familiar ache building inside me, the desperate, childish urge to beg for a seat at a table that had never been mine. But not this time. I took a slow breath, steadying the storm inside my chest. No tears, no outbursts. If they wanted a scene, they would be disappointed. Without a word, I straightened my shoulders, turned on my heel, and walked away. I didn't rush. I didn't flinch. I just moved through the backyard, past the careful decorations, the catered buffet, the family who never really wanted me there to begin with. When I reached my car, I slid behind the wheel and shut the door with a soft, decisive click. The noise of the party faded into a distant hum, as if the world was already moving on without me. Pulling out my phone, I opened my banking app. My fingers moved with a calm precision, unshaken now. The $5,000 I had transferred just a few days earlier, the honeymoon gift to help Tyler and Ashley have their dream trip, sat there in the transaction history like a cruel little reminder. I clicked cancel. The money rushed back into my account with a satisfying little notification ping. Then, just to be sure, I took a screenshot of the updated balance and the canceled transaction. I attached it to a message and sent it straight to Ashley. No words, no explanation, just the cold, simple truth. The message was delivered instantly. I imagined Ashley glancing at her phone mid-toast, her smile faltering when she realized what had just slipped through her fingers. Sitting in the dark, with only the soft glow of my dashboard, I let out a slow, steady breath. That was step one. They thought they had pushed me out quietly without consequence. They had no idea that I had already planted the first seed of my silent revenge, and that the night they had been bragging about for months was still very much in my hands. As the night swallowed the backyard behind me, the hurt gnawed quietly at the edges of my mind. I drove aimlessly for a while, letting the dark roads stretch out in front of me like a quiet confession. It wasn't just tonight. It had never been just tonight. This had been my whole life. I could still remember being 8 years old, standing at the doorway of the living room, clutching the spelling bee trophy I had won at school. I had run home bursting with excitement, heart thudding with pride, thinking maybe, just maybe, this would be the day they really saw me. But when I got there, they were already gathered around Tyler, who had scored a single goal at his soccer game that afternoon. Dad lifted him high onto his shoulders, Mom clapping, everyone laughing like it was the greatest victory in history. No one even looked my way. I had quietly placed the trophy on the mantel myself. A week later, it was replaced by Tyler's soccer ball, and my trophy disappeared without a word. Birthdays were no different. I spent my 16th birthday sitting on the front porch alone, the cake I had baked for myself slowly melting in the afternoon heat. They were out celebrating Tyler's college acceptance, an early admission to his dream school. My birthday, they said when they got home, had simply slipped their minds. It wasn't always outright cruelty. It was the coldness, the indifference, the way my achievements were invisible, my pain inconvenient, my existence almost embarrassing to them. I spent years trying harder, being quieter, being better, winning scholarships, working late shifts to buy my own car, building a life with no help, no applause, no "we're proud of you" to hang on to. Somewhere deep down, a child in me kept believing that if I just earned hard enough, they'd love me the way they loved him. But somewhere along the way, the truth settled in like a stone in my chest. Love, real love, shouldn't have to be earned. It shouldn't hinge on trophies or test scores or silent sacrifices. It shouldn't disappear when you stumble, or when you don't fit into the perfect family photo. Tonight, Dad's words had ripped the last thread. They had spoken their truth out loud. I wasn't wanted. I wasn't needed. I was only ever a shadow in the background of Tyler's golden spotlight. And maybe that was the gift. Because now there was nothing left to hold on to. The silent, aching hope I had carried all these years finally slipped away. In its place was something quieter, sturdier. A kind of peace. They didn't want me there? Fine. But they would feel my absence in ways they couldn't yet imagine. I wasn't the same girl standing in doorways anymore, waiting to be seen. I was someone else now, someone they had never really bothered to know. And I wasn't done yet. Not even close. The morning after that gathering, I woke up in my own apartment, sunlight pooling across the hardwood floors. Everything about my life now looked different from the small, hollow world I grew up in. My apartment wasn't grand by any stretch, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every painting on the wall had been chosen by me, earned by me. There were no borrowed spaces here, no crumbs of affection doled out like rewards for good behavior. This place, this life, was built from my own stubborn hope. I padded into the kitchen, still barefoot, making coffee while scrolling through the endless photos my family had posted overnight. Tyler and Ashley laughing, clinking glasses, posing in the venue they had been bragging about for months. The perfect wedding space Ashley claimed made her feel like royalty. I stared at the photos for a long moment, feeling nothing but a faint, tired sadness. They still didn't know. They had no idea whose name was quietly printed on the bottom of the lease agreement. No idea that a year ago, after saving for years, I had bought into a handful of properties with my small real estate company, and that the prized wedding venue was one of them. It wasn't a petty purchase. At the time, it was just a smart business move. A beautiful old estate home, crumbling at the edges but full of hidden grandeur, just waiting for someone to see its worth. I saw myself in that house, so I restored it, breathed life back into it, much like I had done for myself. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring the bitter warmth. They had rented it through a third-party planner, of course. They never checked the ownership. They wouldn't have cared, even if they had. All my life, they had treated me like I was small, like I was nothing. Yet here I was, holding the keys to the very future they were so busy celebrating. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was recognition, maybe a silent acknowledgement that I wasn't the shadow they thought I was. But even that desire, I realized, was starting to fade. I didn't need them to see me anymore. I saw myself. I glanced over at my desk where the plans for the new expansion of my company lay stacked neatly in a folder. 2 new properties were already under renovation. I had contracts, employees, partners who trusted me, who respected me, not because I was Tyler's sister or someone's daughter, but because I had earned it. I was no longer the invisible girl, standing on the sidelines. I was building a life, quietly, fiercely, piece by piece. I set the coffee cup down, feeling a new kind of steadiness in my chest. Whatever came next wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my own story, my own power, without ever needing to raise my voice. And somehow I knew that would be the sharpest, sweetest kind of justice. Because the thing about being underestimated your whole life is, one day, you stop trying to prove them wrong, and you just prove yourself right. And sometimes, just sometimes, they don't even see it coming. The morning of Tyler's wedding arrived with clear skies and a golden sunrise, the kind that promised perfection. I imagined Ashley waking up giddy, her bridesmaids fluttering around her, photographers snapping away, everyone buzzing about how flawless the day would be. Meanwhile, I stayed home. There was no last-minute scramble, no dress to press, no fake smiles to arrange. I wore jeans and a soft sweater, sipping tea by the window, watching the world move outside without me. For once, I wasn't the outsider because they made me one. I chose it. Still, a dull ache settled under my ribs. I remembered when I was a kid, dreaming about what family occasions would feel like someday. Laughing with cousins, being twirled around the dance floor by my dad, feeling wanted. As reality crushed those childhood dreams, I learned to stop expecting anything different. But even as my phone buzzed with photos and comments from extended family, "Where's Emma?" She couldn't even show up for her brother? I didn't flinch. Let them talk. If there was one thing this family loved more than appearances, it was a good scapegoat. And today, they would need one when things didn't go exactly as planned. I had prepared for this. It wasn't anything cruel or dramatic. I had simply reviewed the venue contract, quietly updated a few things, and made sure that certain privileges, like access to the grand ballroom, required an additional clearance they never secured. They were locked into the smaller, older part of the estate, the one still beautiful, but definitely not the gleaming centerpiece Ashley had posted about for months. They didn't know yet. They were too busy taking staged photos, Tyler straightening his tie in the cracked mirror of the side dressing room, Ashley frantically trying to get better lighting for her bridal shots. The real hit would come later. I leaned back against the couch, picturing it the moment Ashley would realize the photos didn't look like the magazine spread she had obsessed over. The ballroom she had counted on? Locked. Off limits. A small footnote in the rental agreement they didn't bother reading. It wasn't about ruining their day. It was about showing them, without ever saying a word, that I wasn't the powerless afterthought they believed I was. Around noon, my phone buzzed again. A text from an old childhood friend who was attending the wedding. "Hey, where are you? Ashley looks like she's about to blow a gasket. Ballroom's locked. They're stuck taking pics in the old library, LOL." I smiled just a little. It wasn't even about the money they had lost or the slight embarrassment in front of guests. It was about control, the one thing Ashley and my parents craved above all else. And today they were learning that no matter how perfectly you script an image, life has a way of slipping out of your hands when you least expect it. Still, there was no satisfaction in gloating. I didn't text back. I didn't call anyone. I simply stood up, stretched, and tucked my hair behind my ear. I had a dinner reservation that evening, a celebration of my own life, even if it was just with myself. For the first time in a long while, I realized I wasn't waiting anymore for their love, their approval, their apologies. I had already given myself everything they withheld. And somehow, that quiet, private victory was louder than any speech or confrontation could ever be. In my own silent way, I had already walked away, and they hadn't even noticed the door closing behind me. The reception was nothing like Ashley had envisioned. The grand ballroom, where she had spent months picturing herself in the spotlight, was empty save for a few scattered tables and a small dance floor. The guests had been moved into the library, the old wooden beams casting long, cool shadows as they mingled. Ashley's face had already turned a shade of pink from the frustration she was trying to hide behind a forced smile. Tyler, standing by her side, was doing his best to pretend that everything was fine. But it wasn't. As the night went on, whispers spread. I could feel the growing discomfort of the crowd, the sharp glances exchanged, the tightening of jaws. The planner was panicking, rushing to calm down the caterers. Staff members were whispering about technical issues with the audio equipment and lighting that had been set up for the grand reveal of the ballroom. But there was nothing they could do to fix it. The ballroom was locked by my request. I imagined Ashley frantic in the background, texting Tyler, trying to figure out how to save face. She would be trying to smooth things over, putting on her perfect bride persona, but deep down she knew. She knew she had been outwitted, outclassed in silence. I sipped my wine, comfortably distant from it all. A part of me almost felt sorry for them, but not enough to regret any of it. The chaos swirling at that reception, that wasn't my mess to clean up. I hadn't done a single thing except quietly reclaim my power, and they were the ones who had failed to see it coming. As the night wore on, Tyler caught sight of the camera crew, who had been busy trying to capture the essence of the event. I couldn't help but notice his expression shift when he noticed their discomfort. "It's fine," he said, too loud for it to be convincing, his voice carrying across the room. "We'll just make the best of it." But the words sounded empty, hollow even. The golden child was rattled. But, of course, Tyler couldn't lose his composure. Not in front of his friends, his family, the people who had watched him from a distance, worshipped him for his carefully curated life. I imagined him turning toward Ashley then, trying to reassure her with a glance, his eyes shifting nervously toward the rear doors where guests were slowly trickling in, pretending nothing was amiss. Inside me, though, there was no panic, no urge to correct their mistakes. I just watched, still calm, at peace. It was the first time I realized that in my silence I held all the power to leave them to their chaos, to let them sink in the mess they'd created for themselves. At one point, I saw Ashley storm off into the hallway, probably to hide her disappointment behind closed doors, her mascara starting to run. Tyler remained at the front, trying to laugh through the discomfort of his guests' confused murmurs. I checked my phone again, but there was nothing urgent. Just messages from friends wishing me a good evening as I sat, alone yet complete. Ashley had the wedding, Tyler had the attention, and I had the last laugh, silent, dignified, and entirely in control. I took another sip of my wine and smiled. This was no longer about them. This was about me finally stepping into the light. And they had no idea what was coming next. The evening dragged on, but I was no longer watching the clock. My phone buzzed, but I didn't need to look at the screen to know it was another round of frantic messages from Ashley. The pressure was mounting on her now. The guests were all visibly unsettled, whispering about the unusual setup. The photographer was struggling to get good shots in the dimly lit library, and I could see Tyler trying and failing to keep up the facade. It didn't take long for things to reach their breaking point. By dessert, there was a small commotion by the rear entrance. The hotel manager, who had clearly been informed about the situation, was trying to keep a calm face as he walked through the lobby, speaking quietly to someone on his phone. I knew what was coming. My phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. Emma? This is Janet, the wedding planner. The voice on the other end was tight, anxious. We've hit a small snag. The ballroom, it's not open. There's an issue with the reservation. We need your help. I let her talk, heard the panic creeping into her voice as she tried to explain the confusion, the lack of communication. I could hear the clinking of glasses, the muffled chatter in the background. It was clear they were struggling. Janet, I said, cutting her off with quiet authority. Everything is taken care of. There was a pause, then a hesitant, almost relieved sigh on the other end. She thought I was about to fix the situation, to step in as the savior. I'm sorry, I continued, but I'm not coming. You'll need to work with what you have. She was silent for a moment, and then the realization hit her. She stammered. But the ballroom, it was supposed to be locked in. The deposit. I could hear her voice crumbling as she came to terms with the truth. The venue had always been in my name that no one cared to check, my name on the contract that I had reserved months ago, the one they didn't even bother to acknowledge until now. I'll transfer the funds back, I said, my tone smooth, unruffled. No need to worry about it. I trust you'll make do with the library. And that was it. The phone call ended with nothing more than a simple click. But as I stood in my living room, watching the last traces of sunlight fade outside my window, I knew they were beginning to understand. The silence of my actions, silent revenge in its purest form, had struck at the heart of their carefully constructed world. They didn't need a grand confrontation. They didn't need a scene. They were feeling the weight of their own choices now, and it was crushing them. Tyler, who had always been the golden boy, was beginning to realize how easily his facade could crumble. Ashley, the bride who had planned every last detail down to the last shade of blush pink, was now seeing her perfect wedding day unravel in real time. I took a deep breath, letting the calm settle over me. They were the ones who had failed to value me. They were the ones who had made me feel small for so long. And now, without a single word spoken, they were starting to feel the consequences of their own neglect. The only thing left for me to do was watch, silently, as their perfect day slowly turned into the mess they had made for themselves. The evening spiraled into chaos, but not in the way anyone expected. There were no raised voices, no angry confrontations. It was all silent behind the scenes, just the subtle shifts in the atmosphere, the unspoken tension that thickened with every passing minute. Tyler was the first to notice it. He'd been trying to distract himself with the usual family obligations, his fingers stiff as he tried to hold a forced conversation with guests who were too polite to leave but clearly uncomfortable with the situation. I saw him glancing toward the back of the room, his eyes searching for the manager, as if hoping for a quick resolution. But there was no one to turn to. The manager was gone, dealing with the fallout of the venue's unexpected closure. And the guests? They were beginning to whisper in the corner, uncomfortable with the stark contrast between the grand reception they had imagined and the reality of the small, dimly lit library they were forced to gather in. Ashley, on the other hand, had gone quiet. I could tell the cracks were showing in her perfect bride persona. The smile that had been plastered on her face all night was now faltering, her eyes darting around, looking for answers that weren't coming. She excused herself to the bathroom, her footsteps echoing in the hallway as she walked away from the crowd, the weight of the evening catching up to her. Tyler followed her soon after, his voice sharp as he tried to comfort her. But I could see the frustration creeping in, the cracks in his perfect golden child image were starting to show. His relationship with Ashley, which he had always painted as flawless, was now feeling the strain of the tension that had been growing ever since the start of the evening. But none of that mattered to me. I was no longer invested in their drama. They had spent years, decades, ignoring me, diminishing me to the background of their perfect lives. They thought they could push me around, treat me like I didn't matter, and I had always let them. But that was the old me, the one who felt invisible, who desperately tried to please everyone while being ignored. Now, I had everything in my control. I wasn't going to fight them. I wasn't going to scream or yell. I wasn't going to make scene. The silence was more than enough. I watched as the evening continued to disintegrate in front of me. The food was served, but no one was hungry. The music started, but it felt out of place, the notes too cheerful for the tension that hung in the air. Guests were checking their watches, exchanging awkward glances, wondering what was really going on. Ashley finally returned to the main room, looking flushed and disoriented. She went straight to Tyler, who was now visibly tense. They began to talk in hushed tones, but I could hear the frustration in their voices, the realization that something was wrong, something was missing. The truth started to set in. And in that moment, I knew they were beginning to see me for who I truly was. I had never been the weak one in this family. I had never been the one who couldn't stand up for myself. I had just been silent, waiting for the right moment to let them feel the sting of their neglect. And now that moment had come. As the night wore on, the cracks in the facade became more and more impossible to ignore. The guests had long stopped pretending to enjoy themselves, and the awkwardness in the air was suffocating. Tyler and Ashley were no longer the center of attention. They were just two people, struggling to keep up appearances in front of a room, full of people who knew something was wrong, but didn't know what. I stood by the window, my back to the room, watching the headlights of the few remaining cars pull away. The evening was winding down, but not the way Ashley and Tyler had imagined. They hadn't even noticed me for the last hour. I wasn't there to them anymore. And that was the way I liked it. The moment had arrived, the moment I had been preparing for my entire life. I had nothing left to prove to them, nothing left to say. The game was over. The power had shifted, and they didn't even see it coming. Ashley, looking defeated, stepped forward with Tyler at her side, trying to salvage what was left of her wedding day. Her voice was shaking when she finally spoke, her eyes searching mine with a mix of anger and confusion. "Emma," she started, her tone hesitant. What happened? Where's the venue?" I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence stretch out, long enough for the weight of the question to settle. I could see the panic flickering in her eyes as she realized that this was no simple misunderstanding. It was something far more complicated, far more intentional. "The venue," I said slowly, my voice calm and even, "was never really yours. It was always mine." I took a deep breath, watching as the words sank in. The shock on their faces was almost too satisfying to describe. "I made the reservation months ago. I paid for everything. But when I saw you and Dad treating me like a nobody, I decided to let you play your little charade." Tyler's face was ashen, his jaw tight with disbelief. "You what? Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you just? Why didn't I tell you?" I repeated, cutting him off, letting the silence of my words hang in the air. "Why didn't I just make a scene? You think that's what you deserve? After everything? No, I'm not here for drama, Tyler. I'm here for peace. And that peace," I added, my gaze steady and unwavering, "comes with knowing I don't need to fight for your approval anymore." Ashley's lips trembled, and for the first time that night, she looked vulnerable, raw. She had no words. I took one last look at them, my family, and I smiled. Not in a mocking way, but in a way that held a quiet, hard-earned satisfaction. They thought they could push me into the shadows forever, but now they had to confront the truth. I turned on my heel, heading toward the door. I didn't need to wait for their response. I didn't need to hear their apologies or their excuses. They were on their own now, standing in the wreckage of their own making. As I left the venue, I whispered to myself the one truth that had kept me going all these years. I didn't need them. Not anymore. And with that final thought, I stepped out into the night, feeling lighter than I had in years.